Hey guys, it's Ashley, and today we're going to be talking about some summer book recommendations. I cannot remember the last time I gave a summer book recs video, so today we're going to do just that. But before we get started, today's video is being sponsored by Disney Book Group, and there are two books that I would love to share with you that are perfect summer book recommendations if you are looking for either a fantasy or a contemporary story. So the first book is for all of you fantasy lovers out there, and it is Curse of the Spectre Queen by Jenny Elder Moak. This book honestly sounds so good. It is Indiana Jones inspired, set in the 1920s, featuring Celtic mythology. Like, what? So we follow this girl named Samantha Knox, whose father does not come home from the war one day, so she puts away her childish fantasies of, archaeological adventure in order to work in the bookshop. But one day she gets a mysterious package with a diary inside, and these ruthless men start coming after her, so she goes on this wild journey with her best friend and her childhood crush all the way to Dublin, Ireland, where she discovers there's this ancient order that's trying to raise the Spectre Queen, and so she has to solve these riddles and ciphers, just like Indiana Jones, in order to stop the ancient order from basically doing some bad things. Bad things like the end of the world. Like I said, we follow a very strong and capable female protagonist in Samantha, as well as this whole blending in of Celtic mythology and, all of the ciphers and riddles and things. It just honestly sounds like a super fun adventure story for summer. And if you're somebody who enjoys more contemporary stories in the summer, then you should totally check out Like Other Girls by Britta London. The story is about a girl named Mara who gets kicked off of the basketball team in school for a fight that was maybe a little bit her fault. So she decides to give football a chance with her brother, and it turns out she's actually really good at it. But by joining the team, it sets off a chain of events in her small town of Oregon that nobody could have predicted. And then because Mara joined the team and made this big statement, you've got 4 other girls who join the team, and what results is a coming-of-age story where preconceived notions about gender and sexuality and sports and all these other things are kind of turned upside down and flipped on their head. I personally really love coming-of-age stories, as you guys probably already know, but in this one especially, when a character like Mara, who starts off defining herself in a certain way and struggles with change, throughout the story is challenged in different ways and realizes that she doesn't have to be just one thing. I really love those kinds of stories, and that's why I'm really excited to hop into this one, and I think this would be a great summer reading recommendation for anybody who also loves contemporary stories and coming-of-age ones as well. So Curse of the Spectre Queen is available now in both hardcover and an audiobook, and Like Other Girls will release on August 3rd, 2021. And I'll have links in the description down below so you guys can check out more about these books. And thank you once again to Disney Book Group for sponsoring this video and supporting me in my work. Now let's get on to the rest of the video. So summer reading for me can either go in one of two directions, either fantasy or contemporary. I don't usually stray outside of either of those, and more often than not I tend to go for contemporary romance over fantasy, but for some reason this year I've been really in a fantasy mood, so I have a little bit of both to share with you, and some of these you might already know based on, my channel and, what I always talk about, but I've tried to pick ones that I haven't spoken about in quite some time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First up is a Dash of Ash staple if you've been here long enough, but it's one that I haven't talked about in a hot second, and that is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. If you've been watching my videos for a while, then you know that this is one of my favorite series of all time. It's so good. It's what got me loving Victoria Schwab's work and her writing. It's what made her one of my favorite authors of all time. I absolutely adore her, and I absolutely adore this book and this series as well. It's so good. I feel like everybody and their mother has either read it or heard about it, but I wanted to feature it here because, like I said, I haven't talked about it in a while. The last time I read this series, I think I finished my reread of it in 2020, and since then I haven't talked about it. So here we go, just a reminder, I love this series, and if you haven't read it already, you totally should too. If you don't know what it's about, essentially we follow this guy named Kel, who is an Antari, meaning he is a magician who can use all the different types of magic in this world, and he is a smuggler. He goes on behalf of the king to the different versions of London that exist in this world. There are 4 different versions, and he delivers letters to the leaders of those worlds, but he also kind of smuggles things back and forth. So then we enter Lila, who is a pickpocket thief, street urchin kind of girl. She steals something that Kel is smuggling, which then starts this chain of events in which the both of them are involved in basically saving the world. It is such a good story. I absolutely adore all of these characters, and yes, book 2 can get a little bit slow in the beginning based on my reread. I remember that happening, but I swear, guys, the payoff in book 2 at the very end and in book 3 is so worth it. If you think that book 2 gets a little bit slow in the beginning, just push through, I'm telling you, because the end of book 2 and book 3, it's everything. So yeah, gonna stop talking about this now before I continue to rant. just go read this book if you haven't already. It's so good. So next up, I have a duology that I think would be absolutely perfect for summertime because they're very quick reads and it's a really good story overall. And so that duology that I'm talking about is Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. I also have Unravel the Dusk. So I recently finished this duology in June and I really enjoyed it. I thought that book 2 was super fast paced, and although I kind of wish that I had waited to read the first one before I hopped into book 2, or if I had reread the first one because I didn't remember a whole lot of what happened in this one versus this one, but either way I still enjoyed the story. This is a really cool like fantasy adventure story following this girl named Maya who is a tailor. She's a seamstress and all she wants is to be the imperial tailor to the emperor, but only men can have that position. So one day her father gets summoned to this competition to become the imperial tailor and he is ill and cannot go, so Maya takes his place pretending to be her brother and ends up joining this competition. As the story goes on, she ends up having to, you know, travel across the country to sew the 3 gowns of the gods, and it's a crazy wild ride with a good romance in it as well, and I just highly recommend. Like I said, it's just a really great, fun, interesting, you know, fantasy adventure story, and I really enjoyed it. Next up for fantasy lovers, we have a story that I've talked non-stop about this year, so I won't spend too much time, but that is The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. If you've been considering hopping on this series and considering starting it after hearing me rave about it for so long, I would say summertime is probably a really good time to start, because this story, again, just like with Spin the Dawn and A Darker Shade of Magic, is just a super adventurous fantasy story. This one has a lot more like political intrigue and mystery and, you know, all of that kind of thing going on, but it's like, it's so good. It's so good. Plus it's a finished trilogy now, so you can read the entire thing in one go like I did. It was great. In the story we follow 2 characters. First up is Nari, who is just like Lila Bard, a street thief and street urchin and whatever you want to call her. At some point during the beginning of the story, she ends up accidentally summoning this ancient warrior who tells her, hey, you're related to these really powerful people. You should come with me to Daevabad. So they end up going to the magical city of Daevabad, where we meet our second main character, Prince Ali. He is the prince of Daevabad, like I just said, and he's struggling with his own issues, you know? And so through the point of views of both Nari and Ali, we get this sort of picture of Daevabad and of the world that they're living in. All of this crazy magic and mayhem that occurs, and it's so freaking good. The trilogy goes from being like super introductory of this world and like you're kind of learning it and learning about it in this story, to like the 3rd book being like, oh my god, what is going to happen? It's crazy. Highly recommend. So I've got a couple more fantasy recommendations here before I go into some of my contemporary ones. The next one is, again, another Ashley staple on this channel, but I can't make a summer reading list without recommending this story if for some reason you haven't read it yet, because it's just perfect for summer. So that story is none other than Percy Jackson and the Olympians by Rick Riordan. Did you really think I could make a book recommendations video without bringing up something like this? Like, let's be honest. So just like with The Darker Shade of Magic, everybody and their mother knows about this series, especially if you've watched my channel before, so I'm not going to talk about it that much. I will say if you haven't read the series yet and you want to give, you know, a middle grade, super fun, adventurous Greek mythology story a chance, highly recommend hopping on it. But if you've already read it, let's say, or you just have no interest in it, let me give you 2 other recommendations that are super similar to this that I think you'd also really enjoy. So first up, we have a Rick Riordan Presents story, The Stormrunner by J.C. Cervantes. This is a really great story. It's super similar to Percy Jackson, in which we follow a boy named Zane. Oh my god, I almost forgot his first name. His name is Zane, and this is all about Maya mythology. It is so fun. Granted, I've only read the first book, and I keep meaning to make it to the second book, so honestly, I might just have to do a full reread of the first one plus the rest of the series, but the first one was just so good and so fun, and I just highly recommend getting on this book if you haven't already. And the second recommendation that I have that's very similar to Percy Jackson is going to be The Adventurers Guild by Zach Lauren Clark and Nick Eliopoulos. I first read this story like years ago when I did a sponsored video for it, and I thought that it sounded really, really great, and it was really, really great. It's a super fun story. It gave me a lot of perspective Percy Jackson feels. Basically about these two kids who want to go into these different guilds. So this whole world, you know, these kids are chosen as apprentices for these guilds and whatnot, and they have, you know, ideas for themselves. One wants to go into the Mages Guild, one wants to go into the Merchants Guild, but in the end they're chosen for the Adventurers Guild, which is the one in which the most people die. So they, along with some friends that they make along the way, have to go on these sort of death-defying adventures in order to defend the city from evil, and it's great. Just like with the Stormrunner, I haven't read past the first one, and I should probably reread the first one before I get into any of the other ones because it's been so long, but I just remember having a really fun time with this, and also it's a pretty short book, so you can read it really quickly. It's pretty fast-paced. Hop on it! So the last fantasy story that I'm going to feature in this video for summer recommendations is going to be Renegades by Marissa Meyer. Recently, I've had some people tell me that they picked up this series because I recommended it, and they really, really loved it, and I don't know which video that I recently recommended this book in, but I'm gonna do it again here because it's so good, and I think that so many more people should be reading it. Granted, the whole like superhero, supervillain aspect of it can sometimes get a bit cheesy at times, but if you just like push past that and you just embrace the cheesiness, it is so fun and it's so worth it. This world is basically divided into the Renegades and the Anarchists, the good guys and the bad guys. We follow Nova, who is an anarchist or part of the bad guys, and they basically just want to take down the Renegades and, you know, be free again. They want to be able to use their abilities however they want, whereas the Renegades, who are the superpower police force superhero kind of thing, they basically just want to like wipe out the anarchists, get rid of the evil guys, and be done. That's where Adrian comes in, who is our second main character. He is a renegade. He's actually the son of two of the most powerful renegades, and we basically follow their stories. The fun part, though, is when Nova goes undercover and infiltrates the renegades on Adrian's team, and then kind of grows closer to them and becomes friends, and then sort of alliances begin to shift, and just lots of things happen, and it's so fun. One of the best parts of this story, though, which I always talk about when I talk about this story, is the alter egos. Not only like the actual alter egos of them, so like Nova has the ability to put people to sleep, so her alter ego is Nightmare. Adrian has the ability to make his drawings come to life, so his codename is Sketch, but also the fact that our main characters have a third alter ego, which is great. Nova infiltrates the Renegades as Insomnia, and then Adrian has a secret alter ego known as the Sentinel, who is sort of this vigilante hero who's going beyond the rules of the Renegades in order to save lives and stuff like that. Watching these two kids try to balance and juggle all of these different alter egos without having anybody find out who they are is the funniest thing I've ever seen. It's so good, and I want to reread this series so bad, especially to get to the third book when everybody's, you know, secrets just come out and everybody's everything is revealed. It's so good. I love it. Now, if you're looking for some contemporary stories you want to read, I have just a few on this list that I thought would be perfect for summer. So for YA contemporary, my first recommendation would be Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. This story was such a fun, feel-good, coming-of-age story. We follow this main character who is a black trans boy named Felix, and somebody basically outs him at his school by posting pictures of him pre-transition, and he goes on this investigation of sorts to figure out who did it. Felix's journey throughout the story of like self-love and, you know, self-worth and all of that is just so good. It like means so much, and it literally made me cry at the end. So I highly recommend if you're looking for a story that's just very like deep while also being very fun and very serious and very like it's just everything that you want in a coming-of-age story. I just highly recommend so much. Also, like, look at this cover. If this does not scream summertime to you, I don't know what does. And so the next YA contemporary story that I would recommend for summer is one that I haven't talked about in a while again, but I still think about all the time, to be honest with you. And that's gonna be The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. I remember reading this story and finishing it and just being like totally like jaw-dropped, so astounded, like, oh my god, I love this book so much. We basically follow this girl named Natasha and this boy named Daniel over the course of 24 hours where they fall in love and lots of things happen, and it's so wonderful. Like, you would think that it's like insta-love, right? Because it's 24 hours, like nobody falls in love that fast, whatnot, but it's just like, just give this book a chance. It's so good. Nicola Yoon writes this story in a way that just makes you think. It just makes you wonder about things. Like the different point of views that we follow in this story, it's just such a great way of telling the story. Also, the reason that we follow it over 24 hours is there's for a reason. It's because Natasha's family is about to be deported to Jamaica, and then Daniel's also struggling with his own issues when it comes to his family and things like that. So like these characters are struggling with real things. It's not just like, oh, 24-hour insta love, like I love you so much but I have to leave and I'm never coming back, like that kind of thing. Like there's real stuff that these people are going through, but it's so good. Also, didn't they make a movie about this book? Isn't Yara Shahidi in the movie? I haven't seen it yet. Is it good? Should I watch it? Is it worth it? That's the big question. And so finally we've come to the final few books on this recommendations list, and they're all by the same author, and if you haven't read them yet, what have you been doing? You should read them. The author in the books that I'm talking about is basically anything by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I don't have The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo here, but I would also add that to this list. And like I said in some recent video of mine, I can't remember which video exactly it was, but I haven't read any of her earlier work before The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, so I cannot speak personally on those books, but I've heard really good things, so I guess I would also lump them in here. But specifically, Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones, and Malibu Rising. So good. They're adult contemporary fiction, but they're all set in different time periods. So Evelyn Hugo is set in like the 40s and 50s maybe, or the 50s and 60s, I can't remember. So is Daisy Jones and the Six, kind of like the 60s, 70s, possibly. I'm trying to remember the best that I can. And Malibu Rising is set in the 80s, but we also flash back and forth to the 50s. So it's just so good. They're like, you know, slightly historical while also just being like so good. I don't know how to explain. Like if you want a book that's contemporary, that just kind of pulls you into another world, I would just so recommend these stories, especially Daisy Jones and the Six. Like this book was so good, and by the end of it you will wish that these songs were actual songs. Like I know that they're turning this into an adaptation, I'm pretty sure, right? But I don't know if it's for TV or film, but I need to hear those songs. Like I need to hear them. They're so good. But yeah, and I just recently finished Malibu Rising in June, and it was just so good. Like these books can sometimes be really sad at times, right? Like there's a certain part of the story that you get to that you're just like, oh my God, like realizing, you know, the struggles that these characters are facing and what they're having to go through and how they're changing and that kind of thing. But it's just like the stories are so good. I just highly recommend. I recommend. These are honestly some of the books that have gotten me into more adult contemporary fiction recently. So if you're looking to sort of get into that genre, but you don't really know where to start because it's all kind of intimidating in a way, and you want to go from like YA new adult to adult contemporary fiction, like obviously you can just go for it, right? But if you're just unsure, I would just highly recommend these books because they're so interesting and unique in like what they're talking about. Like this is like a rock band from the 70s or whatever, and this is like, you know, a party over the course of 24 hours thrown by these famous surfers who are like this rock legends children, like that kind of thing. Evelyn Hugo is about like movie stars in the 50s. Like the people that we follow in these stories are really unique in that way, and I think that's what makes these stories so fun. I just realized there's like this loud engine buzzing sound in the background, so I'm sorry if you've been hearing that this entire time, but I just realized that's there. But I think that's gonna be it for my recommendations. I am also sorry if you've seen these books a million times already, but I cannot help but continue to recommend because they're just that good. If you have a book that absolutely like screams summer, or you just really want to recommend a book for summertime, leave it down below. And remember you guys that Curse of the Spectre Queen is available now in hardcover and an audiobook, and Like Other Girls is available on August 3rd, and I will have a link in the description down below if you want to check out either of these two books. I think that's going to be everything, so if you want to follow me on any of my socials, all my handles are in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you later. Bye!